Good morning. Thank you for joining us. You're watching KUHS The Stream on Melody Drive. I am Paul Lane, and you're watching the Weekend Boost. Thank you so much for joining us. We typically talk about books on our show, and today we're going to do the same, except we're going to do a little bit different format today. I'm going to share with you something that really is near and dear to my heart. Let me turn up my volume a little bit here. Down one.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. Okay, again, welcome. Before we get started on today's Weekend Boost show, I want to just talk about a couple of my past guests that I've had onto the show. Kimberly Sanchez Cawthorn wrote the book Love and Legacy, Amor Interno, Book 1. This is a book that is a...
You're off your mic.
Nope, I am off my mic. I'm so glad I have a tech man here. Thank you, Henry. Anyway, the book Love and Legacy, Amor Eterno, Book 1 by Kimberly Sanchez Cawthorn. Kimberly was a guest on my show some time back, and she wrote this book. It's an epic novel, and it actually starts in the 1500s and it goes into the modern day times. It's a love story that's very gripping. If you're familiar with Victor Fiesseñor, who was one of Kimberly's favorite, as my favorite authors, and my favorite author in the world. Not a lot of books to show today, but I also wanted to, Horacio Perez wrote the book Unstoppable. It is a Amazon bestseller book, and if you'd like to find out about some good leadership topics and concepts, it's a very easy read. It's a very short, quick read on leadership. Unstoppable, 7 steps to becoming a more intentional leader. I've met Horacio, and I think she's a wonderful leader, and she's just really a person who's set the example of leadership in her family and her community, and I'm just really, really excited to know Horacio. I am the author of the book, The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story. I wrote this book as a result of my experience with my wife's terminal brain cancer. And those of you who have not read my book, you can find this book on Amazon as an ebook. If you'd like to order the book, you can call the radio station at 303-255-0567, 0567, and to order your copy of the book. You can get an autographed copy. Right now the book is $20 if you'd like, so please feel free to send in and order that book. I'm going to make sure my phone is silent here because I don't want to have any interruptions. And with that, we were going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to tell you my story about how I came to find this book, and it was just a real fluke. I was working in construction, and I went into an old abandoned house, and I found this book, and it was pretty old and tattered, and you could see that it had been read, and I picked it up and I started reading it. The book was called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. This book was actually written in 1970. I read through the book. I couldn't put it down. It was so intense, and it was so gripping, and it was so heartbreaking to see the plight of so many nations in the early Americas. And this book actually outlines many different experiences, many different nations or tribes that once existed in this country who are now literally extinct by the hand of a very cruel generation. Dee Brown actually wrote 15 books, and I would have loved nothing more than to have Dee Brown as a guest on the show. Unfortunately, Dee Brown died in the early 2000s, and I think this book should be in every library. I think that this book should be in every hand. I think that everybody who has experienced what happened in Washington, D.C. last month should understand what this book is about. Because what we saw in Washington, D.C. was very similar to what happened in this book, although much of this was done without any leadership. I mean, much of what was done in Washington, D.C. was just done madly and wildly. A lot of what was done in our early America was done under military command and military leadership, political leadership, and I'm very troubled to have read this book because things haven't changed a lot. The Native American people in this country are still starving. They have some of the highest COVID rates on earth. Their vaccination rates are nothing. They're living in squalor with water that is not drinkable, much like it was back in the 1860s. They're living in land that is barren, devoid of any kind of natural resources. Land that you cannot plant crops on, with water that's just downright bitter, on alkali soil that doesn't even harvest a stalk of corn. Things haven't changed, people. And I think it's really important that we take a look at this, and we take a look at really what's happening in history. Because honestly, history does repeat itself. History does repeat itself. And as I go through this book, I actually got this copy of the book at a yard sale. This was given to someone June 26, 1972, this copy itself. So you can see it's pretty tattered and torn. I had found this book and it had never even been opened, and it's really sad to think that someone who had been given this book as a gift could have been enlightened in such a great way. And I'm just going to read you what it says inside the cover here. Traditional texts glory in our nation's western expansion, the great conquest of the virgin frontier. But how did the original Americans, the Dakota, Nez Perce, Utes, Poncas, Cheyenne, Navajo, Apache, and others feel about coming of the white man, the expropriation of the land, the destruction of their way of life? What happened to Geronimo, Chief Joseph, Cochise, Red Cloud, Little Wolf, and Sitting Bull, as their people were killed or driven into reservations during decades of broken promises and oppression and war? Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is a documented account of the systemic plunder of American Indians during the second half of the 19th century. Battle by battle, massacre by massacre, broken treaty by broken treaty. Here for the first time is their side of the story. We can see their faces, hear their voices as they try desperately to live in peace and harmony with the white man. There are 49 photographs of great chiefs and their wives, warriors in the words of the Indians themselves, culled from the testimonies and transcripts in previously unpublished writings, with a straightforward, eloquent, and epic style. Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee is a unique, disturbing history of the American West from the Indian point of view. Guys, it's always said that the victors write history, but that does not erase the reality that there is two sides to every story. You know, when I was a young man and I used to teach in the Denver public schools, I did a demonstration. I would take a silver dollar and hold it up to the class, and I would ask everyone in the class, "What is it?" And everyone agreed it was a silver dollar. But then I would throw the trick question at them. Is it heads or is it tails? Is it heads or is it tails? And everyone in the class would always agree it was heads. It was heads. Everyone could see it was heads. And then the profound statement, "You're all wrong." And I would flip the coin over and say, "You see, it's tails." There's two sides to every story. And there's two sides to the history of the Native Americans in this land. And they've been erased. They've been forgotten. And I want to challenge you to never let this day be forgotten. Never let the lives of these men and women be forgotten. Because the reality is, they did live. They did have lands. They did live in peace. And they were wiped out. Wiped off of the face of the earth. Some people estimate 25 million of them. And you know something? January 6th, when I watched the insurgency in the nation's capital, all I could think was, I wonder what is going through the minds of these men as they mindlessly marched through the Capitol, defecating on walls and urinating on floors, looking for the heads of people with whom they disagreed. The American way of freedom is not viewed the same way by everyone who calls this the American way of freedom. Not everybody in America has always been free. Not everyone in America has been free of oppression, of harassment. And not everybody who's had it has deserved it. I'm just going to point to a few pages in the book today. I'm just going to talk a little bit about each section. I'm opening up and into the book, and I'm just going to open up to a story. Manuelito was a Navajo. Manuelito was the chief of the Navajos, and this is a painting. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a painting of Manuelito. And in Manuelito's land, they had peaches, and they were farmers too, and they were peaceful. And I just take this paragraph, and I just want to just read what this native person saw. And I'm just going to start with this. What happened next was written down by a white soldier chief, Captain Nicholas Holt. The Navajo squaws and children ran in all directions and were shot and bayoneted. I succeeded in forming about 20 men. Then I marched out to the east of the post. There I saw a soldier murdering 2 little children and a woman. I hallooed immediately to the soldier to stop. He looked up, but did not obey my order. I ran up as quick as I could, but could not get close. And there, soon enough to prevent him from killing the 2 innocent children and severely wounding the squaw. I ordered his belts to be taken off and taken the prisoner to the post. Meanwhile, the colonel had given orders to the officer of the day to have the military or mountain howitzers brought out to the open upon the Indians. All this happened because there was a race. Manuelito had a very fine horse, and he was going to have a race with one of the soldiers. And when the race began, Manuelito's horse ran off to the side and did not run the race. And after the race was won, supposedly, by the American soldier, it was discovered that the reins were cut on Manuelito's horse. And when he came and he said, hey, this race was unfair, these people were killed. They were murdered because they were cheated in a race, in a simple horse race. Is that justice? Shortly thereafter, Manuelito and his people were run off and put into a concentration camp, or what we call reservation. Am I angry about it? I'm angry about it. I'm sad about it. I'm troubled about it. I'm heartbroken about it. Women were bayoneted. Children were shot from their mother's arms. The Indians scattered all over the valley below the post, attacked the post herd, wounded a Mexican herder, but did not succeed in getting any stock. Also attacked the expressman some 10 miles from the post, took his horse and a mailbag, and wounded him in the arm. After the massacre, there were no more Indians to be seen about the post, with the exception of a few squaws. Favorites of the officers. Commanding officer endeavored to make peace again with the Navajos by sending some of the favorite squaws to talk to the chiefs. But the only satisfaction the squaws received was a good flogging. I can imagine that there was so much division. There was so much confusion. There were some in the tribe that said, you know what, we got to trust these guys. And some that said, every time we trusted them, we got bayoneted. I don't know what went through their minds, but they were human beings with lives, with children, with husbands and wives, with mothers and fathers, and they were wiped out. This book has actually quite a few different chiefs. War comes to the Cheyennes, Little Crow's War. Little Crow was one of the chiefs, and I'm not going to go really too deep into his story. I want to read you this quote. The Cheyennes were talking to the soldiers. "The Cheyennes do not break their word," one eye replied. "If they should do so, I would not care to live longer." Wine Coop, if you go downtown to Denver, you'll see that there's a street named Wine Coop. And it's a very, very small, insignificant street. Wine Coop was actually an ally of the natives. And Wine Coop said afterwards that his conversations with the two Cheyennes on this march caused him to change his long-held opinion of Indians. He said, "I felt myself in the presence of a superior being. These were the representatives of a race that I heretofore looked upon without exception as being cruel, treacherous, and bloodthirsty, without feeling or affection, or friend, or kinder." 5 days later, along the headwaters of the Smoky Hill, Wine Coop's advanced scouts sighted a force of several hundred warriors drawn up as though for battle. George Bent, who was still with Black Kettle, said that when Wine Coop soldiers appeared, the Dog soldiers got ready for a fight and rode up to meet the troops with bows strung and arrows in their hands. But Black Kettle and some of the chiefs interfered, requesting Major Wine Coop to move his troops off a little distance, and they prevented a fight. As many times as they could, they de-escalated. As many times as they could, the natives moved away. They walked away. They rode away. They ran away. Because they knew they could never outgun the endless faces that traveled through their nation. If you're from Denver, you know that we have a major avenue in South Denver called Evans Avenue. Evans Avenue was actually named after one of Colorado's governors. There's a mountain in Colorado named Mount Evans, named after Governor Evans. But if you knew who Governor Evans was, you might be like me and oppose any street being named after Evans. You might be opposed to any street named Sheridan, General Sheridan, who said the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Can you imagine if you were home one day and all of a sudden millions of people came through your neighborhood and said, "You can't live here anymore, you gotta go. The only good American is a dead American"? Can you imagine how afraid must you have been? Might you have been? I got this little section I highlighted and I want to read this to you. There was a council at the Colorado Capitol here in Denver. The Cheyenne and Arapaho came to ask Governor Evans for peace. And they sent Colonel Wine Coop as their representative because Colonel Wine Coop knew that these were a peaceable people. And Colonel Wine Coop went to the governor, and I'm just going to read it here. Before the council began, Wine Coop visited Governor Evans for an interview. The governor was reluctant to have anything to do with the Indians. He said that the Cheyennes and Arapahos should be punished before giving them any peace. Should be punished before giving them peace. Why? Punished for being punished. This was also the opinion of the department commander, General Samuel R. Curtis. There's a street named Curtis downtown too, who telegraphed Colonel Shivington at Fort Leavenworth that every day I want no peace till the Indians suffer more. Why? Finally, Wine Coop had to beg the governor to meet with the Indians. "But what shall I do with the 3rd Colorado Regiment if I make peace?" Evans asked. "They have been raised to kill Indians, and they must kill Indians." Folks, I found this book in 1984, and I devoured it. And there was one paragraph that stuck out in this book more than all the others, and it was this one. "What shall I do with the 3rd Colorado Regiment? They were raised to kill Indians, and that's what they'll do. And that's what they'll do." But what if they're peaceful? It doesn't matter. What if they don't pick up arms? I want them punished. Why? Why on earth did they have to go and take the lives of so many people? If you're from Denver, if you go to the 8th Avenue Viaduct in Denver, and you go to the west end of the bridge, and you walk under the bridge toward the east, you will see that there's a great big monument. And it said that here was the Colorado 3rd Regiment in 1860s, during when Lincoln was the president. And that's where these soldiers were stationed. And they were never given the opportunity to know that they were in the presence of superior human beings. My heart is so shattered as I read this book, and I got it and I read through it again, and was just preparing for today's class, today's show. I was speechless, because I just can't believe this really could happen. And it happened right here, right in this area where we are today, where I am today, just south of here. What shall I do with the 3rd Regiment? They were raised to kill the Indians, and that's what they will do. If you're from Colorado, you probably know a little bit about Sand Creek. Black Kettle was an Indian chief, and Black Kettle was assured by American generals that as long as they raised the American flag and the white flag of surrender, they would never be fired upon. So when the Indians were at this place called Sand Creek, we don't know exactly where Sand Creek was today, but they were at a place called Sand Creek. Most of the men were out hunting. There wasn't a lot of braves, of soldiers, of native soldiers in the camp. And they were overrun by American troops, and they were killed. I'm just going to read right from a section here I highlighted, and I just wanted to read this section to you. By this time, hundreds of Cheyenne women and children were gathering around Black Kettle's flag, the one they said they wouldn't fire upon. Up the dry creek bed, and more were coming from White Antelope's camp. After all, had not Colonel Greenwood told Black Kettle that as long as the United States flag flew above him, no soldier would fire upon him? White Antelope, an old man of 75, unarmed, his dark face seamed from sun and weather, strode toward the soldiers. He was still so confident that the soldiers would stop firing as soon as they saw the American flag and the white surrender flag, which Black Kettle now had run up. Medicine Calf Beckwith, riding alongside Colonel Shivington, saw White Antelope approaching. He came running out to meet the command, Beckwith later testified, holding his hands up, saying, "Stop! Stop!" He spoke in plain English, as I can. He stopped and folded his arms until he was shot down. Survivors among the Cheyenne said that White Antelope sang the death song before he died. Nothing lives long, only the earth and the mountains. Robert Bent, who was riding unwillingly with Colonel Shivington, said that when they came inside of the camp, I saw the American flag waving and heard Black Kettle tell the Indians to stand around the flag, and they were huddled, men, women, and children. This was when they were within 50 yards of the Indians. I also saw a white flag raised. These flags were so conspicuous in position that they must have been seen. When the troops fired, the Indians ran some of the men into their lodges, probably to get their arms. I think there were 600 Indians in all. I think there were 35 braves. And some old men, about 60 in all. The rest of the men were away from camp hunting. All they were trying to do was get away from the violence. They had gone away from the city into Sand Creek where they might be safe, but it wasn't so. When war came to the Cheyennes, their life was changed. Their life was changed. Folks, if you're just joining us, you're watching KUHS The Stream on Melody Drive, and my name is Paul Lane. I am the host of this show, The Weekend Boost. Today, we're talking about the book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. I challenge you, I have never so strongly challenged you to go out and buy a book as I am now. They still have it. I was just at the Tattered Cover bookstore a couple of weeks ago. Guess what? I found it there, a fresh copy. America needs to see what America is, where America's been, lest history repeat itself. I'm going to continue. I'm skipping forward a little bit. And I'm in a section about Red Cloud, Red Cloud's War. Red Cloud was one of the chiefs, one of the many chiefs. And they're talking about a battle where a man by the name of Fetterman was killed. And so I'm just going to read this paragraph I have highlighted. The Fetterman massacre made a profound impression upon Colonel Carrington. He was appalled by the mutilations and disembowelings, the hacked limbs, the private parts severed and indecently placed on the person killed. He brooded upon the reasons for such savagery and eventually wrote an essay on the subject, philosophizing that the Indians were compelled by some paganistic belief to commit the terrible deeds that remained forever in his mind. Had Colonel Carrington visited the scene of Sand Creek Massacre, which occurred only 2 years before the Fetterman Massacre, he would have seen the same mutilations committed upon the Indians by Colonel Shivington's soldiers. The Indians who ambushed Fetterman were only imitating their enemies, which was the style the Indians did. The practice, which in welfare, as in civilian life, is said to be the sincerest form of flattery. Did you know that the natives never took a scalp until scalps were taken from their own? It was the way that the natives fought. They imitated the war practices of their enemy. It was actually a compliment. The Fetterman Massacre also made a profound impression on the United States government. It was the worst defeat in the Army that they had suffered in Indian warfare, and the second in American history from which came no survivors. Carrington was recalled from command, reinforcements were sent to the forts and in the Powder River country, and a new peace commission was dispatched from Washington to Fort Laramie. No matter how much they tried to seek peace, peace could not find them. It seemed to be their destiny to be harassed, to be run off, to be mutilated, to be slaughtered. Why? Because they had a different belief system. Because they didn't believe what was being done by the white man to them was justified. Because they believed that there was room for everyone in the United States of America. But they were sadly mistaken. Many of you have heard of Cochise and the Apaches, the Chiricahua. And Cochise was a pretty well-known chief. And I just highlighted a couple of areas here and there that I wanted to read. Not until the spring of 1871 was any white man able to find Cochise. He was very, very elusive. And when the last communication was established, the chief declined the government's invitation. He said simply that he could not trust either the military nor the civilian representation of the United States. Why would he? Cochise was a Chiricahua Apache. He was taller than most of his people, broad-shouldered, deep-chested, and his face intelligent, with black eyes, large, straight nose, very high forehead, thick black hair. White men who met him said he was gentle in his manners and very neat and clean in his appearance. When the Americans first came to Arizona, Cochise had welcomed them. In 1856, during a meeting, Major Enoch Steen of the 1st U.S. Dragoons, Cochise promised to let Americans cross Chiricahua country on the southern route to California. He did not object to the Butterfield Overland Mail established a stage when they established a stage station in Apache Pass. In fact, the Chiricahuas living nearby cut wood for the station, trading for supplies. But no amount of kindness, no amount of goodness, no amount of peaceful activities was enough to satisfy the hunger of the bloodthirsty people that would not stop coming. There's a picture of Cochise, and I don't know how well it's going to come up, but there's a picture of Cochise. Cochise was not a man who wanted to have war. But by the time the white settlers came, he had already had 2 years of conflict with the Spaniards who had come and tried to save him. Cochise was overtaken. Ended up in a concentration camp. It's been a while since I read this section, so I don't remember the exact ordeal or the outcome of Cochise, but I just wanted to touch on that chapter for just a moment. The ordeal of Captain Jack. Every chapter in this book starts out with a date. So I'm just going to read this one to you. 1873, January 6th, U.S. Congress begins investigation of Credit Mobilier scandal. Sound familiar? March 3rd, Salary Grab Act raises salaries of congressmen and government officials retroactively. Sound familiar? May 7th, U.S. Marines land in Panama to protect American lives and property. September 15th, the last units of the German army leave France. September 19th, the failure of J. Cook and Company banking firm precipitates financial panic. September 20th, New York Stock Exchange closes for 10 days. Severe economic crisis spreads across the nation and world. Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days, and Mark Twain's The Gilded Age were published. This is a quote from Captain Jack. I am but one man. I am the voice of my people. Whatever their hearts are, that I talk. I want no more war. I want to be a man. You deny me the right of a white man. My skin is red. My heart is a white man's heart. But I am a Modoc. I bet you haven't even heard of the Modoc tribe. I am a Modoc. I am not afraid to die. I will not fall on the rocks. When I die, my enemies will be under me. Your soldiers began on me when I was asleep on Lost River. They drove us to these rocks like a wounded deer. I have always told the white man heretofore to come and settle in my country, that it was his country and Captain Jack's country, that they could come and live there with me, and that I was not mad with them. I have never received anything from anybody, only what I brought and paid for myself. I have always lived like a white man and wanted to live so. I have always tried to live peaceably and never asked any man for anything. I have always lived on what I could kill and shoot with my gun and catch with my trap. Kint Fwash, Captain Jack of the Modocs. Captain Jack was an honorable man. They weren't thieves. They weren't savages. They weren't dirty. They weren't deserving of cruel torture. They just wanted to live. They just wanted to live. And you know, when I hear of people who want to kill other people because they're Democrats, they want to assassinate them, to behead them, and to hang them because they're Democrats, I'm afraid. I'm concerned. And when I see our Congress and our Senate not voting to convict those insurgents who would have been murderers had they had the chance, I am afraid. I'm concerned that we're going to see a second phase and a third and a fourth, and it will not stop. Because these people don't care if you want peace. These people don't care if you want to get along. They don't want to get along. They want war. What am I proposing? I'm proposing justice. I'm proposing that those who are guilty of insurrection be charged with insurrection. The leaders who took tours of the Capitol need to be investigated for that, because they are complicit. They are co-conspirators. I didn't mean to get political, but I'm a little bit moved by what's going on in our system today in our country. There's so many stories within this chapter alone, the ordeal of Captain Jack. There are so many stories that will just rip your heart out. Why would you want to have your heart ripped out? Because it's true. Because this happened. To deny does not make it not so. This happened, people. From the day I read this book, my life was changed. I never dreamed that such atrocities could be committed. I never dreamed. There were so many tribes that existed in this country. There were so many nations, languages wiped from the face of the earth. As D. Brown wrote his book, he became more and more aware of what really happened in history and who the real savages were, who the brutality and the title of brutes and brutal murderers, who should wear that title. I just hope that you're moved to go pick up this book. I really do. I'm just going to open up and I'm just going to read in a couple of places. In this book, it's really, really something, because they have photographs of all kinds of different native chiefs. Gall, Two Moon, Chief of the Cheyennes. Hump, photograph, Fort Bennett, South Dakota, 1890. Crow King of the Sioux, courtesy of Denver Public Library. I'm telling you, this book is an eye-opener. Many times when the U.S. cavalry would come to a native camp or encampment, they would come in the middle of the night. They would come with their guns drawn, and they would take aim at anything that moved. What if it was a 2-year-old child? Shoot her. A mother with a child, bayonet her. Take the baby out of her womb. Cut her breasts off and stretch them over your saddle. The American Indians, the natives, had never seen such atrocities. They could never imagine this could be happening. And yet here they were. I don't even know what to say. I just, as I read this book, my heart sinks. My heart feels saddened. The next tribe that I want to talk about, the chief was his name was Hainmut Tukyolkit, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce Indians. Most people never heard of the Nez Perce. The Nez Perce were a very peaceable tribe up in the northwest United States. And it starts out chapter 13, the flight of the Nez Perce. In 1877, January 1st, Queen Victoria proclaimed Empress of India. January 25th, U.S. Congress passes Electoral Commission bill requiring recount of electoral votes. Sound familiar? Hayes-Tilden contest still in doubt. Did you know that Abraham Lincoln was elected with only 40% of the popular vote? 40% of the popular vote? The Republicans have been trying to rig elections since 1860. Am I a Democrat? Yeah, I guess I am. But I see injustice and I call it out. And today in Georgia, the Republican Party is making it impossible to vote. They can seize power and hold power only one way, and that is by stopping the vote. Has it happened before? You're reading it. In the 1800s, in 1877. What year is this? February 26. Southern Democrats meet securely with Hayes. Republican representatives conclude the compromise of 1877 in which Southern Democrats agree to support the Republicans in exchange for withdrawal of federal troops from the South and ending of Reconstruction. February 27th, Electoral Commission declares a recount in favor of Hayes. March 2nd, Congress confirms the election of Hayes. March 5th, Hayes inaugurated as president. April 10th, President Hayes begins to withdraw troops from southern states, signaling the end of the Reconstruction era. April 15th, first business telephone installed between Boston and Somerville, Massachusetts. July 14th, general strike halts movement of the railroad trains. You see, a lot of what we see today, it's been going on and going on and going on. Now, let's hear from the Nez Perce chiefs. Yellow Wolf of the Nez Perce said this: the whites only told one side, told it to please themselves, told much that is not true, only his own best deeds. Only the worst deeds of the Indians has the white man told. And then a quote from Chief Joseph, Hein Mut Tukyok Leket. The earth was created by the assistance of the sun, and it should be left as it was. The country was made without lines of demarcation, and is no man's business to divide it. I see the whites all over the country gaining wealth, and see their desire to give us lands which are worthless. The earth and myself are of one mind. The measure of the land and the measure of our bodies are the same. Say to us, if you can say it, that you were sent by the creative power to talk to us. Perhaps you think the Creator sent you here to dispose of us as you see fit. If I thought you were sent by the Creator, I might be induced to think you had a right to dispose of me. Do not misunderstand me, but understand me fully with reference of my affection for the land. I never said the land was mine to do with as I chose. The one who has the right to dispose of it is the one who created it. I claim a right to live on my land and accord you the privilege to live on yours. The Nez Perce were not a warring tribe. They did not ever take up arms. In fact, let me just read you this. In September 1805, when Lewis and Clark came down off of the Rockies on their westward journey, the entire exploring party was half famished and ill with dysentery. Too weak to defend themselves, they were in the country of the Nez Perce, so named by the French trappers who observed some of these Indians wearing dentalium shells in their noses. Had the Nez Perces chosen to do so, they could have put an end to Lewis and Clark and their expedition there on the banks of the Clearwater River and seized their wealth of horses. Instead, The Nez Perce welcomed the white Americans, supplied them with food, and looked after their explorers' horses, and for several months while they continued by canoe to the Pacific shore. Thus began a long friendship between the Nez Perce and white Americans. For 75 years, the tribe boasted that no Nez Perce had ever killed a white man. But the white men's greed for land and gold finally broke the friendship. In 1855, Governor Isaac Stevens of Washington Territory invited the Nez Perce to a peace council. He said there were a great many white people in the country and many more would be coming. That he wanted the land marked out so the Indians and white men could be separated. If there were to live in peace, it was necessary, he said, that the Indians should have a country set apart for them, and in that country they must stay. Chuicacas, the chief known as Old Joseph by the white men, told Governor Stevens that no man owned any part of the earth, and a man could not sell what he did not own. You see, they could not conceive of land and property in the same sentence. You could not own land. The land owned you. But see, it was very hard for the settlers to understand that concept because they were all about materialism and wealth and gain and greed for the most part. The governor could not comprehend such an attitude. He urged old Joseph to sign the treaty and receive presents of blankets. Take away your paper, the chief replied. I will not touch it in my hand. Aliyah, who was called lawyer by the white people, signed the treaty and so did several of the Nez Perces. But old Joseph took his people back to their home in Wallowa Valley, the green country, the green country of winding waters, wide meadows, mountain forests, and a clear blue lake. Old Joseph's band of Nez Perce raised fine horses and cattle, lived in fine lodges, and when they needed anything from the white men, they traded from their livestock. Only a few years after the first treaty signing, government men were swarming all over the Nez Perces again, wanting more land, of course. Old Joseph warned his people to take no presents from them, not even one blanket. After a while, he said, they will claim that you have accepted that pay for your country. In 1863, a new treaty was presented to the Nez Perces. It took away the Wallowa Valley and 3/4 of the remainder of their land, leaving them only a small reservation in what is now Idaho. Old Joseph refused to attend the treaty signing, but lawyer and several other chiefs, none of whom had ever lived in the Valley of Winding Waters, signed away their people's lands. The Thief Treaty, old Joseph called it, and he was so offended that he tore up a Bible a white missionary had given him to convert him to Christianity, to let the white men know he still claimed the Wallowa Valley, and planted poles all around the boundaries of the land where his people lived. Not long after that, old Joseph died, and the chieftainship of the band was passed on to his son, Hainmat Tukalkaket, young Joseph, who was then about 30 years old. When the government officials came to order the Nez Perce to leave the Wallowa Valley or go to La Paui Reservation, young Joseph refused to listen. And so what did he do? Young Joseph didn't want to fight, but he didn't want to go to a reservation either. And so if you're familiar with the story of Chief Joseph, he gathered his whole tribe, and they disappeared into the mountain. They disappeared. The white men sent trackers after them. They sent scouts after them, and they could not find them. If you've ever been fortunate enough to drive to Montana, I have, and I saw the place where the Nez Perce climbed and disappeared. One of the many places where the Nez Perce disappeared and were never found. The Nez Perce at one time were spotted. The cavalry saw them going up a mountain, and the cavalry came from one side, and other troops came from the other side, and they came, and the only thing they found was the other cavalry troops, because the Nez Perce disappeared. Old men, old women, children, pregnant mothers disappeared. It's amazing what we will do when it comes to our survival. I have to tell you that Crazy Horse was known to have told his soldiers that when he died, he wanted his heart to be buried at Wounded Knee. Hence the title of this book. If you know anything about Wounded Knee, it's also in here. Pine Ridge Reservation, where I believe 150 old men, women, and children were gunned down. Several U.S. cavalrymen were shot during the massacre. Oddly enough, they were taken down by friendly fire. This book tells the truth. It tells the other side of the coin, the other side of history that you and I have never seen. But we really need to be aware. We need to be very aware of this. Why? Because history repeats itself. Because those insurgents, they don't care who they kill. Really, I don't believe they cared if you were a Democrat or a Republican on January 6th. If they found you, they were going to behead you. They took a guillotine with them to Washington, D.C. They took a hangman, a gallows. They had every intention of hanging anyone who disagreed with them. Those people were out there. Those people are dangerous. And we have no domestic terrorism laws in America. Maybe it's complex, maybe I don't understand it, maybe it's politics, maybe it's racism. The Ku Klux Klan is hundreds and hundreds of years old. There have been terrorists all of their existence, but they've never been called a domestic terrorist organization. Well, I label them domestic terrorists. The Proud Boys, domestic terrorists. The 3%ers, all of them. These are not militias. You know, the First Amendment says we will have a well-trained militia. These are not well-trained militias. Do you think a well-trained militia would defecate in the Capitol Hill, on the office of the Capitol? Urinate in the walls of the Capitol? A militia is a group of people who have honor, who have discipline, who are trained. This is not a well-trained militia. I'm sorry, I did not intend to get into politics today, but as I'm reading through this book, as I'm talking to you as this book, I see injustice. I see history trying to repeat itself. We talk about the XL pipeline, and again to the Pine Ridge Native Reservation, and the water they drink is impure and dirty. They want to run a pipeline right through their sacred ground. Are they not human beings? Do they not deserve some respect, dignity? Sacred ground is sacred ground. I'm so thankful that President Biden has shut down that operation. Shut it down. Because there's injustice going on in a country right now, and we need justice. When Chief Joseph finally died, it said that the cause of his death was a broken heart. You see, eventually they rounded him up. They put him in a cage. And his life ended. And he did it without killing. He lived his life as a non-combatant. And it saddens me greatly to read this story. Every page you turn to on this book is filled with so many amazing stories. Stories of honor, stories of bravery, stories of determination, and many of you listening to this show are of Native descent. Some are not. And please, I don't mean this as an attack on white people. I mean this as an expose of the reality of the kind of mentality that we have in this country that has not changed. It's really the same, just a different day. Same BS, different day. Different decade. Different century. Please, go out and buy this book. I'm going to read you just a little bit more. Early in the morning of July 28th, Looking Glass, who was one of the natives, looked upon the warriors and moved the warriors in a screening line, among the trees on the upper slope of the canyon. At the same time, Joseph led the non-combatants and livestock up a gulch, climbed to the top of a mountain and was well around the canyon barricade before Captain Ron discovered what the Nez Perce were doing. The captain went in pursuit of the Indians, but after a few skirmishes with Joseph's rear guard warriors, he decided not to risk a real fight and returned to his now useless barricade. Believing that they had escaped from Howard and unaware of Gibbon's approaching army, the chiefs decided to move south on the familiar hunting country of the Big Hole. There they could rest their ponies and hunt wild game. If the white men would leave them alone, perhaps they would not have to go to the grandmother's land and join Sitting Bull. On the night of August 9th, one who limps, Colonel Gibbon, brought up a mixed column of local volunteers and mounted infantrymen and concealed them on a hillside overlooking the Nez Perce camp on Big Hole River. As dawn approached, the volunteers asked Gibbon if they would take prisoners during the attack. Gibbon replied that he wanted no Indian prisoners, male or female. The night air was cold and the men warmed themselves by drinking whiskey. At first daylight, several were drunk when Gibbon gave a command to attack. The infantry line began firing volleys and then charged the Nez Perce teepees. 15-year-old Cautoclis was asleep when he heard the rattle of fire. I jumped in my blankets and ran about 30 feet and threw myself on the hands and knees and kept going. An old woman, Patsikomi, came from the teepee and did the same thing, bent down on knees and hands. She was to my left and was shot in the breast. I heard the bullet strike. She said to me, "You better not stay here. Be going. I am shot." And then she died. Of course, I ran for my life and hid in the bushes. The soldiers seemed to be shooting everywhere, through teepees, wherever they saw Indians. I saw little children killed and men fall before bullets coming like rain. Folks, I have never been so adamant about a book. Every American needs to read this book. Every American needs to understand the fight and the plight of the native in this land, of unjust wars, of unjust treatment, of merciless torture. My time is up. I just hope that as I've shared with you today, that I have moved you to make the decision to go and order your book. It's a book that will open your eyes. It will change your life. Thank you for joining us today. You've been watching The Weekend Boost. I am Paul Lane, author of The Caregiver's Handbook, and you're watching the stream, KUHS in Denver. Thanks for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful day.